everyone, welcome back to Board Games Unlocked, and today I'm going to be doing a how to play for Mark Swanson's Feudum. This is I don't know if it's been requested by anyone to do. I can imagine it has, and I know there is a video out, but it's like a 30-minute quick video. Oh boy, okay. Here we go. This Feudum is basically like a economic medieval simulation game. Like, you're trying to get the most veneration points, victory points, by doing a bunch of things, basically having to do with guilds. The game comes off as extremely whimsical, but the gameplay is not. And as my usual structure, I'm going to do setup. Right now I already have it all set up for a 4-player game. Nothing really changes in, lesser counts, except for maybe one thing, and I'll mention it. But I'm going to talk about setup, then I'm going to talk about all the actions you can take with examples, then I'm going to go into guild actions, and that's kind of the way it's going to be structured. So let's jump into setup. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is set the board in the middle of the table. Obviously nothing will be on it as it is right now. This is just for ease of the video and making this game kind of go a little bit smoother. But you'll set the board in the middle of the table. Then everyone will select a player color, and they will get a bunch of things. First of all, they're going to get a player board, and this player board will show you the round of play, all the different actions and their double actions, attack and defense, goods summary, what the goods can do. And on the back, it will show guild actions and how scoring works. So everyone will choose a color, and they'll get their player. Then you will give everyone their deck of cards. These are basically the cards that they will play for each individual action. You will give them the deck that corresponds to their color. You will give them the player pouch, disc, and this is for every color. Every color gets the same amount of stuff. You will then give them 7 food. The green cubes are food, so you'll give them 7 of that. You'll give them 7 influence markers of their own color. You will give them 7 shillings. The silver are the silvers are worth 1, and then the gold is worth 10. So you'll give them 7 of the silver. You will give them their 3 pawns. These are not dice. I should mention they're pawns that they will get placed on the board. And then you will give them 4 of their discs. You'll give them 4 discs, and on the back of 2 of them are these symbols, and they'll pertain to gameplay later. But you'll give them 4 of those. And that's the first thing that you're going to do. The second thing you're going to do is you will take one of their blank discs and you will place it on the 0 with the other player discs. The third thing you're going to do is you are going to take the vessels of the game, and you'll take, and they're going to look, kind of like this. These are what the vessels look like. There's a ship. See if I can get that to focus. There we go. There's a ship, there's a submarine, and there's a flying vessel. You'll take all of these and you will shuffle them, and you will place them next to the alchemist. The alchemist is that old-looking guy with like a surprised ooh look, and he also has a gear symbol. So you'll place that next to him. Over by the knight, you will take everyone's remaining influence markers and you'll place them nearby, and wherever you wish. You will take the monsters, and you can place them off the board. I put them on the board just for aesthetic reasons. But the 2 monsters that the base game comes with, you will place them near or on the knight. As well as you will take 2 influence markers of each player, and you will place them on the first 2 spots of the Knight's Guild. This is just, I'm skipping ahead a little bit in the setup, but every player color, you will put 2 in this row, similar to what you see here. If you're playing with less than 4 people, you will have 2 dummy colors there as well. So, but in the case of a 4-player game, 2 for each player. These are the Royal Wit cards right here, and you will take all of these and you will shuffle them, and then you will place them face down near the board. It doesn't correspond to a particular faction or a particular guild. You'll just place them near the board, as well as you will take these royal seals right here, if I can get it in the camera, right here. You will take those and you will create a face down pile of them. After you kind of shuffle them and mix them, make sure they are face down where it's showing the seal part, and you'll place those near the board. You will also take these targets right here, and you'll just put those in a pile near the board, as well as the shillings anywhere that you feel comfortable. Next, you will take these region tiles. They range from 4 all the way to 1, and you will stack them in descending order. So, kind of like how it is here. You will notice on the board before you do this, there is going to be a 5, and these correspond to the different regions of the game. So what you will do is you can take all the 4s and you can shuffle them together, kind of like, or you can just kind of randomly place them. So like it'll go 4, then 3, then 2, then 1, and you'll do this for every different region, making sure that every pile goes from 1 all the way to, well, you'll place 1 to 4, but 5 does matter. So you'll stack that like so, and then that will be the next step that you do. The other thing that you will do is you will take all of the double-sided, like, location tokens, and you will remove them and you'll place them off. You can organize them if you want. Not all of them are the same. Like a lot of them, there's a town and then a bunch of farms. You will just place those off to the side, as well as the feudums. So the blue ones that have the guild symbols on them, like these, are the feudums of the game. You'll set those off. You don't have to organize them. I did. It just makes it a little bit easier for gameplay, but you'll set those off to the side. Okay, then you will shuffle the remaining locations. Now, what I have here is everything is revealed, but before you even do this part, is these are all blue-sided, or like they're not double-sided. One side is blue. You will actually shuffle all of them face down, and then you will take the ones that have a pink circle, and you will place those on the corresponding spots that have a pink outline, like so. So you'll basically shuffle all of the ones that look like this together, and you'll place them face down on those spots. Those are the starting locations, and the rest, after you do that, will be shuffled face down and then placed. And once you do that, then you will reveal all of them. So kind of like I already have some revealed, but let's say all of these were face down. Then after you do that, you will flip them face up like that. So that's the next step that you will do. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take the goods that you'll need for the merchant, and you're going to place them accordingly. So there's going to be these little squares. If you can see them, you can. Perfect. You will take 4 food, which are the green, and fill up that row. You will take 4 wood, which is the brown, and fill up that row. You will take 4 iron, which is the black, and fill up that row. Then you will take 3 sulfur, which is the yellow, and you will place them, leaving 1 space open where it's going to say 1s, meaning 1 shilling, empty. And then you're going to do the same thing with the saltpeter, which is the white, and then leaving 1 space, and it's going to say 2 shillings under that. Then you're going to do the same thing for the alchemist. You will take 3 saltpeter and fill up the saltpeter spot. It's a white spot underneath there. You will take 1 sulfur and fill up, doesn't really matter, but the top row for the sulfur. Then you will take 1 food. There are 3 spots for food. You will just take 1 food and fill up that row. Then you will fill up the remaining rows with 3 iron and 3 wood, like so. Then what you will do from the shuffled tiles of vessels, you will draw 2 of them, and you will place them on this spot right here. It's going to show a little ferry boat and 2 shilling symbols, and you will place the 2 vessels on top of that, and that's how you set up the alchemist. I'm kind of combining 2 setup steps into one, but the remaining goods that you have will go into the haversack. So this is the haversack, and I know I'm kind of zoomed in here, but all the goods will go in that. So the only goods that you'll have out at this point, if you're following the how to play, is you'll have the 7 food per each player, you'll have the merchant filled up, and you will have the alchemist all set up. So the next step, after you realize all that, is you will take the remaining king seals, which are the red things, that with the crown on them, and you will draw 4 of them, and you will place them on the rosary beads for the monk, for setting up the monk, and you will order them from highest to lowest. So in this case, I have a 2, 3, 4, and 5, surprisingly, but sometimes you can get like 2, 2, 5, and 4, or something like that. So you'll have the 2, 2, 4, and 5, kind of like that. So that's setting up the monk. You will then draw 1 more king seal bead or rosary bead, and you will place it on this chicken, the only discolored chicken, and you will place it there. Then you will take 10 goods from the haversack, 10 random goods, and you will place them basically on this spot, kind of like they're spilling out of the barn. So 10 goods will go there. You will place the epoch marker, which is the blue marker, on this spot, the first spot, which shows the 1 on that spot, and then you will randomly take goods from the haversack, and you will place them on spaces that have an N. So let's see if I can get this shot. So if you look very closely, like the very top one has an NW that does count. It doesn't just have to be an just a you know, a lone N. And anything that has an N on it, you will take a random good from the haversack, and this is something I didn't do, and you will place it nearby. So there's 1 there, and there's going to be 1 per location. So there's 1 there, 1 there, 1 here, which I'm probably, yep, and then let's see, there's 1 way up here, and then there's 1 right there. And you'll just place those next to them. It doesn't have to be on them or anything, just to note that that's where those goods are. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to randomly decide who the starting player is going to be. However you want to decide to do that. You will give them the progress die, so this is a die in this case, and then you will give them the marker. I think it was supposed to look like a crown, but mine just looks like a butt plug. So you will give them both of these, and then every player will decide what 3 goods they want from the haversack. So they can choose any of them. They can choose 3 more food. They can choose 3 saltpeter. They can mix and match any way they want, but they'll get 3 of those. Then they will place their pawn, one of their pawns, on the on a starting location, starting with the first player. So they will take their pawn and decide which each of the faces on these pawns or dice really correspond to a guild. This one corresponds to the farmer. This one corresponds to the merchant. This one corresponds to the alchemist. This one corresponds to the knight. The crown corresponds to the noble, and the cross corresponds to the monk. And they'll place them in a starting location. And remember, the starting locations are the ones that are pink. So let's say I want to, and who you place is kind of going to give you an affiliation with that guild and allow you to perform specific actions in that guild, whether you're the one with the most influence or second most. So a lot of the times the players will pick, you know, who they want to be able to kind of control, and they'll go from there. So let's say I wanted to control the church for whatever reason. And I'll explain, obviously, all the guild actions and all the actions you can take that would influence this decision. If it's your first time playing, you're kind of going to go in blind. But who knows? You might be a lot smarter than me and be like, oh, I know how this game works. I didn't even need your video. You suck. But let's say I wanted to go here, and I wanted to have influence with the church. Well, then what you will do is over on each guild location, they have these little spots that show like points. Let me see if I can get there we go. Once you do that, the first person who places, like, will take an influence marker, and they will place it up on the one that shows a 5. Now, there's a 5, a 3, and a 1. The 1 only corresponds in a 5-player game or higher. So in all reality, the person who places first will go on the 5. This means that you are the guild master. If someone else were to place a pawn during even the setup of the same faction, let's say red placed their pawn and they also wanted to do monk, they would become the journeyman. And basically what this means is, 1, during the scoring phases, the guildmaster will score 5 points, and the journeyman will score 3. If you're playing with more, there's an apprentice spot. That's the 1. They don't do anything. They'll just get a point. But the guildmaster gets to do the guild's push action, and the journeyman gets to do the guild's pull action. And I'll explain all that later. But that would influence a decision of which dice you want to place, because each guild does a different action. But during setup, most of the time, in my experience anyway, people place their pawns of different faces, so they can each all control a different guild. So, but if someone does do this, know that you don't bump someone. So, like, if I go here, I technically have a point in this faction, so does red, but you have to exceed them. So if he somehow got 2, then he would take that over. But right now it's 1-1. He does not exceed me, so he becomes the journeyman, and I become I remain the guildmaster. So that's the last thing that everyone is going to do for setup of Okay, Feudum. So that is the setup for Feudum. It is relatively quick, but it does take a little bit like to get used to. I've just done it enough. The way the game works is, or the way a round works is, every player will take their entire deck of cards, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. Of 11 cards, and they're going to choose 4 of them. So, let's say I chose these 4. Obviously, I'm not going to do like a traditional round. I'm just going to explain every single card and what it does and how it, what it looks like on the board. But just know that you will pick 4 of them. That's where you're going to do that round. The other cards will go off to the side. And then throughout the round, everyone will play 1 card. It'll go like me, then the next person, next person, next person. I'll play my second card. And then it goes around like that, 3rd card, around, 4th card, around, and then that's pretty much the end of a round. So after everyone does their actions, you will nourish your pawns, meaning that you will spend a food per pawn you have on the board. Remember, pawns are the squares, the dice looking things. So 1 food per pawn. There's variations, I'll explain all this later. Then the first player, the one who has the butt plug and the progress die, will roll it. They will remove, they will look at the face, and they will look at these, remember the stacks I mentioned? And they will remove a tile that corresponds to the current era. It runs 1 to 5 eras, and that's kind of how the game progresses. I'll explain that after I explain everything else. Then it goes to advance the epoch marker, if possible, and score epoch if triggered. So that's pretty much how a whole round works. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all of these actions, and I'm going to explain what they do, what their symbols mean, what they look like on the board, and then that'll be mostly it. Then I'll go into guild actions, and we'll go from there. So yay! Okay, so the very first action that I'm going to explain is called Migrate. So this is what the card looks like. Now, Migrate, each card has a top and bottom ability. I guess the bottom ability is for an advanced game. So if you're playing just the basic game, you would ignore anything what this was and only ever do the top action. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to explain both. So the top action for Migrate allows you to place a pawn on the board. This is how you get the rest of your pawns on. Now, whenever you do this action, you can only place a pawn on a spot where you have a already existing pawn or an influence, on a location. So if I had, if my situation looked like this, the pawn that I bring out could go here, or it could go here. Whenever you bring a pawn onto the board, you have to pay a food. It's basically, thematically, you're paying the food for the journey for them to come to this land. So you pay the food, it goes back into the haversack, and then you place your pawn in an appropriate spot. Whenever you're placing a pawn, you will choose the die face that you want, and then you'll place them. And this could change up, the factions, like the guild influence and all that. So just remember, that every pawn that you have gives you 1 point of influence towards that faction. If that's more than anyone else, then you place an influence in that spot that I mentioned earlier during setup. So, like, let's say I place one there. That's the migrate action. The top action of the migrate also allows you to, well, not also, it allows you to pull a pawn off the board, and you do not have to pay a food to pull them off. So you can either bring someone in, or you could take someone off. Now this could result in you not having anyone on the board, and that's perfectly okay. Now whenever you pull someone off, that does change up the influence of the guild. So if at the beginning of the game my only influence in the Monks Guild was that pawn and I pulled him off, then I would lose that influence because there's no one there to influence the guild. So that is the top action. The bottom action is called Distant Kin. And there's going to be some cards will have a symbol right here. This one does not. This means you can do both of them. It's basically, this is like a bonus for this, meaning Distant Kin, if you have an alchemist pawn already on the board, then you can kind of ignore that rule of placing, you know, with a pawn or with an influence. You can place your pawn at any starting location. There happens to be a starting location up there. Let's say that I had an alchemist on the board. I pay the food. I can bring in, you know, a pawn all the way up there even though no one is there because I know someone there. So that is the migrate action. The next action I'm going to explain is the move action. So, a couple things on here. This is also a bonus for the top action, and then this symbol right here corresponds to another way you can get points throughout the game. So, the move action, the top ability allows you to move your pawns. Now, moving is a little bit weird in this game. You get movement points equal to the number of pawns that you have on the board. So right now I only have one pawn on the board, meaning I only get one movement point. If I had all 3 pawns on the board, I would get 3 movement points to allocate however I wish. I could put, you know, I can give one pawn 3 movement. Yay! Or I can give each of them 1, or I can give one of them 2 and one of them 1. You know, just in any order that you wish. So let's just say, you know, for simplicity's sake, I only have the one pawn on the board. I can move him 1 space. Now, movement is simple enough, but the icons on the board are not so simple. So, okay, this looks pretty good. Normally, pawns can, if they have no vessels, which I explained in setup, they can only move by road, and road are these light gray, you know, woundy things. So if you can see that road, yeah, then I can move with the 1 point I have. I can move from here up to there. Yay! Okay, so that's simple enough. Like, the roads will connect to most locations. Well, you might notice that there are some symbols here that aren't just aesthetically pleasing, and this is where it kind of gets difficult. These symbols right here that look, let me pull my pawn off, that look like birds or arrows, you can move by those if you have a flying vessel. And I'll explain how you get vessels later. But if you have happened to acquire one of these, then you can move along those birds. And in this case, like, let's move this over. That connects to this. So let's say I was here. Yay! And I wanted, on my turn, I wanted to move my one location. I would place my vessel down, put my pawn on top of it, and then move across. And now I'm there. Okay? Well, the thing with vessels, and this is for all vessels, if you ever move off of one, your vessel stays with you. So once you place it on the board, it will stay on the board. And if another pawn, you know, happened to come across, they could take that. So now I'm kind of stranded if that were the case. So, and you can stay on it. So you can, like, you can move across accordingly with it. But if you ever move off of it, then someone else can take it. Now, that is for the arrows, alright? If you also look, you will see these white dots in the sea, and this is only ever in the sea, you can, if you have a submarine, which was, whoa, that's really zoomed in. If you have a submarine, that's how you move along those. So, same situation, I place one down, this submarine happens to go all the way around and up to here, whoops, right there. So let me zoom out a little bit. There we go. So the submarine bubbles, I call them bubbles, come all the way up to this, they go up here, and they interact with almost every location here. So same situation as the air vessel, if you leave it, it stays. The third spot, the third movement is with a ship. And the ship looks, on these are the waves. If you can see the waves, let me zoom in a little bit, because it's kind of difficult. Yep, so these right here, the actual triangles, are waves. And they are what ships move on. So if I was here, and I wanted to move, this goes all the way, it trails way, basically almost anywhere. Like I could go from here to here on my ship. And, you know, if I leave it, it stays there just like everything else. There is a fourth movement that doesn't require a vessel, but it does require another circumstance to be able to use it. So, it's called the ferry, and so over here on the alchemist spot, normally there's two vessels there at the beginning of setup. If those are bought, then the ferry becomes available. So around the board, let's see, where am I? There I am. Nope. But I'm going to say I'm there because that seems to make the most sense. If I was here, you could see the little ferries, so the symbols will correspond. I can take the ferry and pay 2 shillings to move there. Now remember, that is only if there are no vessels available for purchase. If there are, even if there's one, you cannot take the ferry. That is not an option. Okay, so that is the 4 ways of movement. But whenever you move, if there is a good there, you pilfer it. Okay, so the spaces at the beginning of the game during setup are going to be on north spaces. So if I were to move there on my move turn, so if I started here and I spend my 1 movement point to move up here, I would pilfer that good and it would just go, you know, near my board. That's the top move action. The bottom one is called this one. Let me kind of, there we go. The bottom one, oh, what do they call it? They call it Godspeed. If you have a monk in play, which I did originally, he gets an additional movement. Like so, if I spent my 1 movement point to move here, and then Godspeed, he gets an additional movement, and that's how that works. So, the very top icon I showed you, which was a way to get points, is there's another card that you can pick, which I'll explain later, that this corresponds to. So I will explain that whenever I get to that. But that is the move action. The next action is called Influence, and this one's, you know, relatively straightforward. This is just how you place influence on the board, which corresponds and comes into play later for a multitude of reasons. But the top action, all it does is you will place an influence marker on every space that you have a pawn. So remember, these were the influence markers. So if I had a pawn there when I played the influence, it would just go right on top. Now, this is a good spot to explain rulers, subjects, and serfs. So, at every location, there can only ever be 3 total influence markers and none more than 2 different colors. So, if I do this action, let's say I had a pawn here as well. I play the influence action, I would place an influence there and an influence there. Alright, great. If there was someone with a different color there, let's say blue had a color there, okay? every influence marker that is on top of a location is that location's ruler. Now, rulers allow you to improve locations, and they also reap benefits from any of the serfs. So, but let's say I was here. Blue has an influence marker. He's the ruler. I play the influence card. I would play an influence there, which means I'm the ruler. And here I would place it next to. That means I am the serf. And the serf, what happens to the serf is I can tend landscapes, but I also have to, give some of them to the ruler. That's ruler and serf. If I were to play the influence card again, and I'm pink or purple, I now have more rule there, influence there, so now I become the ruler, blue becomes the serf, and my other pawn, or influence, is the subject. Now, the subject doesn't really do anything, it just kind of, it can help defend, pretty much. But now that spot is completely taken up. There are ways to remove them, but as of right now, this is full. Like, no one else can come in and add their influence. Blue cannot come in and add another influence to try and war with me. Right now, as purple, I am the ruler, and I'm also the subject, and the blue is the serf. So, that's the influence step. The secondary is, what do they call it? Money is influence, is what that's called. Now, what that means is, let's say blue was the ruler, and I go to do the influence, and you know how normally I said to become ruler, you have to, at least get 2 influence there to out-influence them. You can pay pay 1 shilling to upseat a lone ruler. And basically, that's what that does. So, I did not have to play the influence card twice. I just had to pay some money. So now I am the ruler, and he is the serf. And that is the influence card. What this 2 means up here, if you can see it, there we go, is that it means this card can be played twice per another card, which I'll explain later. But that is the influence action. The next action is called Improve. Alrighty, so Improve is a card you can play that will actually generate you some points. So, the top action of Improve, it allows you to change locations that you rule to other locations. Alright? Luckily, through my example, I rule all 3 types of locations. Now, what you can do is, if you rule an outpost, which are the ones with the towers, you can spend 1 wood from your supply, so that you've gathered throughout the game, and turn it into a farm. This is where those double-sided tokens come in. So if I decided to upgrade this one, I would take a farm tile, and I would just swap that out. So now this is a farm, and now I own a farm. Okay? What you can also do is you can upgrade a farm to a town by spending an iron, and you can upgrade a town to a feudum by spending a seal. So this has quite a bit of moving parts. The reasons why you want outposts is outposts help you defend, farms allow you to get resources, and towns allow you to tax. Feudums give you a lot of influence in particular guilds, so there's a benefit to every single one of them. Now, whenever you upgrade, you will be looking at this chart. And this chart is basically how many points you get. From here up at the top of the card, it has a question mark that shows that you're going to get points, but it depends. Right now, at the beginning of the game, you will be in era 1. And this will also show you how the eras move. Once there are 4 era 2 tiles showing, you move to era 2. And then if there are 3 era 3s, then you'll move to era 3. If there are 2 level 4s, you'll move to level 4, and then as soon as the 5th one shows, you're at the end of the game. But at level 1, you will look at what you are upgrading to. Okay, so if I'm upgrading to a farm, In Era 1, I'm only going to get 2 points. If I'm upgrading to a town, I'll get 3, and if I'm upgrading to a feudum, I will get 4. And it just gets more and more as the eras go on. At the end, at, Era 4, if I'm upgrading to a feudum, that's 7 points. So you will be looking at this chart to determine how many points you're going to get. Then, what you will do is you will take the top tile of the stack that corresponds to the area that you upgraded in. There are 6 different areas. You have your mountain region, which are up here, and that is the far right stack, if you're facing the board the right way. Then you have the Badlands region, which are these, the darker olive green, which are right next to the mountains. That corresponds to the second far right stack. Then you have the forest region, which is this right here, the greener area. That corresponds to the third track from the left. Then you have, I think it's the sand region, the desert region. This is the desert region, which is the third stack from the right. So you have mountains, badlands, desert, forest. Then you have big islands, these 2 right here, which corresponds to this stack right here. And then you have small islands. I don't even know if you can see them. Nope. Big islands. Then you have small islands. These 2 islands over here are the small islands, which are the far left. So, whenever you improve a location by spending the resource, if I improve this location that I rule, which is an outpost to a farm, by spending a wood, I would take the topmost desert tile. So that's the topmost that I would take corresponding to the area, or area, yes, and era that you're in. If I upgraded again in the desert, I would not take the level 2 tile because we're not in era 2. It only comes from an era that you're in or previous to. So if we were in era, 3, and there was still level 1, I would take the level 1. And on the backs of these are landscapes, which is what the second part of the improved card is about. So let's say I upgraded this one to an outpost. Yay! Okay. Oh, you can't upgrade to an outpost. I apologize. An outpost to a farm. So let's say I upgraded to a farm. I would get the 2 points, which I would move over on this track. Yay! I have 2 points because that's how much I get in Era 1. I would take the Era 1 tile, and then, and that's that. The second part of the improve is how you place landscapes. And landscapes can be worth points, and they're also ways to get resources. So this is the first card I've shown that has this arrow in the middle. What this arrow means is you do one or the other when you play the improved card. Everything else was a bonus that I've played between influence, move, and migrate. This one is you either improve a location or you play a landscape. So, what are landscapes? Well, landscapes are going to be on the back of these tiles. So whenever you get one for improving, you'll have a landscape, okay? And some of them will look like this. This is a silver mine. Others will be, and I'll just show you from the rule book right here. You have orchards, which will give you food. You have archery butts, which will give you targets. You have silver mines, which will give you shillings. And you have sulfur mines, which will give you sulfur. If you choose the bottom half of improve, which is thematically called Tend Landscape, you will place this in a spot that you have a surf. So right now I couldn't actually do that because I have no surf. But let's say I had. Yay! I ruled this area. There's a... oh no, that's a subject. I apologize. So let's swap this. There we go. There we go. So now I'm a serf. I apologize. So blue is the ruler. Pink is the serf. I play the improve action. I will place... You would take any landscape that you've acquired and you'll place it next to the location and put your serf on it. When you play You also have to play a wood. I apologize. So at the bottom it shows you have to spend a wood to be able to place the landscape down at a spot where you have a surf. You will get 2 points for doing that. And then you will place the good that corresponds to that landscape. In this case, it's 3 shillings. And so I would place 3 shillings on that. So immediately upon placing the landscape, you will get the good. Let me zoom in a little bit. And at the beginning of each epoch, each landscape will refresh. So once I've placed that, you at that point have to choose if you want to take all those goods or keep them there. So if I decide to take these 3 shillings, I would actually have to give 1 to blue. That's why I said about being a ruler. So 1 would go to the blue player, the other 2 would go to me. Or I can choose to keep them there. Yay! Then the next epoch, 3 more shillings would go there for a total of 6. Then I would make that same decision. Okay, well, now I'll take them, and I'll give 1 to the ruler, and then I'll take the other 5. The reason why you might want to keep them there is 1, for a bigger payout, and 2, whenever you're scoring an epoch, you will get 4 points for every landscape that you are tending that has resources on it, whether it's silver, whether it's sulfur, whether it's food, or whether it's archery butts or targets. You'll get 4 points. You'll still get 2 points for every empty landscape that you're tending. But, so it's a kind of a risk-reward kind of thing. That is the total of the improve action, one or the other. I should remind you, this also icon tells you that you need to take a tile, and then you'll get some points for improving, but you also get some points for tending landscapes. Another action you can do is called Explore, and this one's pretty simple. So for every outpost that you rule, you get to draw 2 Royal Wit cards. So I would get to draw 2, and you will draw 1 additional card for each other outpost or feudum you control. So if I controlled 3 outposts, I would draw 4 total cards and keep 1. So the Royal Wit cards, that phrase is kind of difficult. They're the ones that have the goofy looking king, the one who looks like he shit his pants. You will draw 2 of those, and you will keep 1. And the explanation for what those are actually on the back of the rulebook. So I'm not going to explain every single card. Just know that there are 2 separate types. There are mandates, which can be played once anytime to gain a bonus, or there are charters, and charters are endgame objectives that will give you points, but you have to have a seal to be able to place on top of it at the end of the game. So that's pretty much that. The secondary ability that you can do is you can turn in an iron to draw an additional 2 cards and keep 1. So in this case, if I did both and turned in, I could draw, but I had no other outposts, I would draw 4 cards and keep 2. So that is the Explore action. Another action is called Harvest, and you can do this if you rule a farm. So what this does is it allows you to draw 5 random goods from the haversack and place them on your farm. This is ways for you to be able to basically kind of help the farmer guild and stuff like that. But so you will draw 1 good. You'll draw 5 goods, but you can draw 1 additional good for each feudum you rule, for each other farm, and for each rosary beads that you have in your possession. And you get rosary beads from the monk. Now, that indicates your total. So initially you draw 5. Let's say you have a rosary bead that I explained its setup of +2. So you would actually draw 7. The top action is you can just draw 7. Okay, great. You draw 7 and you'll place them next to your farm. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Man, I'm good. And you'll just place them there. Woo! So that's that. Or, let me kind of zoom in so you can see a little bit better. So you'll just place the goods right next to that. Or you can take a favor. And what this means is you will look at the chart here, And this tells you, the top number tells you how many you're doing a partial harvest. How many you will put next to the farm and how many you will put into your supply. Now, if I had done a partial harvest and I was still drawing 7 because it's 5 plus the +2 of the king seal, I would randomly place 5 there. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? And then the remaining 2 would actually go into my supply. If you decide to do that, if you decide to do a partial harvest and keep some for yourself, which is, I guess, unholy, then every rosary bead that you have, you will flip over. So you're forfeiting partial future harvests, future good harvests, and future favors, but you will gain king seals. So it's there's kind of a benefit to doing that. The secondary option in here, well, it's not even an option. The secondary thing is if you have a farmer pawn out, then you get to look at the goods that you're taking. Like, it's called Inspect the Harvest. So if you have a farmer pawn, you can visibly choose your favors after you randomly draw. So if I had drawn, like, the 7, you know, 1, 2, let's say there's 7 there, I could be like, oh, I really needed 2 sulfur. And I would just take them, and then the rest would go there. So that is the harvest action. The next action is called tax, and basically this is the way you get shillings. For every tax, or for every town that you rule, you get 2 shillings. Well, for one town that you rule, for every other feudum or town, you get an additional shilling. So if I control and rule 4 towns, I would get 5 total shillings. And that's that. The bottom is if you have a knight out, you get an influence from the supply. So that's just that. If you happen to have a knight out, yay! So just gain 1 from the general supply over by the knight area, and that's that. Then collect your shillings. Okay, so another action you can do is the conquer action. Now the conquer action is a requirement pretty much if you ever want to hold a feudum or own a feudum and get that sweet boost in the guild. Now, I should mention that whenever you upgrade to a feudum, you get 3 points within the guild. I'll explain this more as I talk about the guilds, but I should just let you know that a feudum, that's what that gets you. Now, whenever you choose to conquer, this is another card that has the either or symbol. So you can either choose to conquer or choose to what's called starve the people. So we're going to focus on conquer. Now, whenever you conquer, you can choose to attack an opponent's pawn or attack their feudum. In this example, we are going to talk about both of them. So whenever you attack a pawn, and this is lovely illustrated on the back, or actually on the front of your, where is it? Of your player aid, but I'll still explain it here. Whenever you attack, you have to choose, obviously, who you're targeting. The first example I'm going to give is talking about attacking a player's pawn. Now, pawns have an attack value of 1 and a defense value of 2. So, a pawn attacking a pawn just straight up will never, like, the attacker will lose. And whenever you're conquering, you have to exceed their defense. Equaling their defense does not, is not a win. Now, like I said, defense of 2, attack of 1. Well, as the attacker, you can choose to spend 1 saltpeter. Now remember, the saltpeter is the white, to increase your attack value by 1. Now still, this is not enough for a pawn to attack another pawn, because now it's 2 to 2. Alright? And saltpeter only ever increases your attack. It does not increase your defense. So let's say I was to attack that. Right now I'm losing. Okay? There's not really a whole lot I can do in this example because there's nothing there. Like, it's 2 to 2. But whenever you are attacking, you can have multiple pawns attack or defend, but you can only ever attack with... you can only ever target 1 pawn. Like, it's not like if there was another defense here that if I won, I would take care of both of them. No, I would still have to target 1. But let's say this is the situation. Right now it's 3 to 2. Yay! There's nothing the defender can do at this point, so they would lose. So what happens when you win in attacking a pawn? Well, the person who attacks gets 2 points. Alright, 2 veneration points. Then the conquered pawn gets returned to the opponent. You would adjust guild status, meaning that if this was a pawn removed, then if that was the only thing that the blue player had in the farmer guild, then they would lose that influence. And then you could move one of your player discs over to basically onto the military service track. So you would take one of yours and place it on, depending on when you attacked, if that was your first attack or your second or third. This is extremely important, and I will explain it more whenever I talk about attacking feudums. So, if you're attacking a feudum, let's take this off, and then let's make it like this. Okay, actually, let's do a better example. Let's do this. Okay, so right now, pink or purple owns is holding that feudum right there. That's the knight's feudum, and so right now it's giving the pink-purple player 3 points into the knight's guild, which is quite a bit. Blue wants to attack. Feudums have a defense of 2. And if this is a situation, then right now it's 1 to 2. There's nothing that the pawn can add to it. But they could add a saltpeter. Okay, right now it's 2 to 2. Well, if you are the knight, if your pawn is the knight, and this is the only pawn that can do it, the knight can add as much saltpeter as they want. Like, they can add another one. Okay? So right now it is, it's 3 to 2. Okay? Now, let's see. If there's a player pawn there, they can also help defend it. But something else that's interesting, let's say that pink had a subject there and blue had a serf there. Like, let's say that was the situation. Whenever you are attacking a feudum, and only a feudum, you can have a rebelling serf. Like, they're like, hey, I don't want to work for this poo-poo face anymore. I will help my pawn, my liege lord, whatever, attack. So right now, it is 1, 2, 3, so now it's 4 to 3. Well, a subject can help defend, okay? So this is kind of where it can get pretty tricky. So right now it's 4 to 4 because you have a defending pawn, you have the 2 defense of the feudum, and then you have the defending serf, but you have a knight with 2 saltpeter and a rebelling serf. So right now it's 4 to 4. So it would end in a draw, and like the defense always wins. Well, one thing that you can get, and I'll explain this also whenever I get to the Knights Guild, but at some point you can get a monster. Yay! Monsters are fun. Monsters can help attack as well, just like pawns. So right now, let's say this was the case. It was 4 to 4. Now blue is attacking. It has 5. Blue wins. Yay! Well, boo, because I usually play pink or purple. If the attack is successful, which it is, because it's 5 to 4, the attacking player will get 4 points, 4 veneration points. They will replace the feudum with an outpost. So the outposts, remember, are the pinks, or the towers. I don't have that, on hand right now. But it would get replaced with an outpost. You would adjust guild status, just like normal with attacking a pawn. All influence markers would go back, so the purple's influence markers would go back, and of course the saltpeter would get spent. And if there was a rebelling serf, which in this situation there was, they would actually be placed atop the outpost to rule it. So they kind of help take over. Any goods or landscape tiles that were there, like goods from farms that were there, or goods that were on landscapes, those remain. They are now they're tied to the land, and that is that's conquering. Now, the secondary action, like I mentioned, is called Starve the People. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Focus! And what this means is that if you have a noble pawn, like let's say I had a noble pawn like that, and then it was like this, and sure, like that. Okay? if you have a noble pawn beside a location with an opponent's subject or serf, so there's the opponent's subject, you can conquer one of them and return to its owner. Like you just starve them out. This is important. Like, you do this instead of your regular action. So pretty much what you do here is you just remove them. And then you can move one of your player discs onto the military service track. So you don't actually have to conquer anyone through like military. You can actually starve the people through the noble, and then still, you know, get credit for placing a disc on the military service track. There's 2 ways you can actually get on there. Well, technically 3. Like the conquering the pawn, conquering the feudum, and then starving the people. And then after you do this, like after a successful starve the people action, you will remove all alms, which the alms were the rosary beads on top of the chicken. So if you do that, if you do the starve the people action, then you will actually remove all of them, and they'll go to the general supply because they have no excess food because you starve them. And that is the conquer action. Another action that you can technically do is called defend. Now, this is the only card that you can play out of turn. And essentially what it does is when you are being attacked, like in any situation where a pawn's attacking another pawn, or your feudum's being attacked, you can play the defense card out of turn to increase your defense by 1. May not sound like a lot, but as you saw, the attacker has to surpass your defense, not meet it. So increasing by 1 will help that. And also you get a victory point, or a veneration point, I'm sorry. But so let's say no one attacks you and you pick the card, you can still play it and get the 1 point. This is your 3rd card that has the either or ability, and the bottom action is called Royal Immunity, and you turn in a food to the haversack, and it nullifies the Starve the People action by the Conquer ability, by her secondary ability. It nullifies that, and you will actually take a like a king seal from the supply, and you put it beneath the subject or serf to basically show that it's not getting, like, it has royal immunity, and you can remove it at any time to get it, but you won't, obviously it won't be protected. So if you do the royal immunity, then that subject or serf is protected while that seal is there, but if you pull it, then they're no longer protected. And that is the defense action. Now, I know I mentioned this quite a bit through all of these actions, but another action you can technically pick, or another card, is called the repeat action. It's a little snake, like ×2. Now, this is where some of these other cards come in. That ×2 from influence, from move, and from, well, I guess it was just, oh, there's one more. And it's the last action. But basically, influence, move, and the guild action are the only ones that you can do a ×2 ability. Now, this is a top ability. So those two, now, all that means is that you get to play the card again. If you want to influence again, you can do it again with the ×2. If you want to move again, you can do it with the ×2, and the ability stays the same. With move, though, so influence, nothing changes. If you play the move card twice, meaning you play it once and then you do the ×2 and you play it again, this is where you can go on like an epic voyage. Now, up at this track right here is the epic voyage track. There we go. What you will do when you play the move card twice is you will take a disc, preferably a blank one, and it doesn't have to be, but you're limited on disc space, and you will place it on the firstmost spot there. Now, whenever you're there, like if the game were to end, now this is end game scoring, or part of it. If at the end of the game you would get 3 points, or actually if you're the highest one, if you're the only one there, you're getting 5 points. But sorry, no, you're getting 3 points if you're here, you're getting 5 points if you're there. Now, every time you move twice, you will move this track. So, and once you move here, you will get a Royal Wit card, which means you'll draw 2 and pick 1. And then the 1 goes at the bottom. So, like, every time you move twice, you'll move up. And then you'll move up again if you move twice. Or not move twice, play the move action twice. And then you go there. And then you'll go there. And then it keeps going up. And then if you end right here, there's only one spot. At the very end of the game, you would have made it to the temple, I guess, and you'll get 17 points. So that's why that little temple is there. Let me zoom out. So that's why that little temple is there to remind you, hey, if you play this card twice with the ×2 action, you know, then remember to place a disc on there or move it up there. The secondary ability is you can you can discard a saltpeter to play a card, to play any card twice. Except, so that means cards like Migrate, that doesn't have a ×2, you can play this again. The Tax, you can play that again, but you have to spend a saltpeter. There are only 2 cards that can never be played twice, and that is Defend and Conquer. And they'll show that by a ×2 being crossed out, meaning that even if you play this or spend the saltpeter, you cannot do these 2 cards again. And that is the ×2 action. The last action that you can do is the guild action. Now, the top ability is where you can do a trade action, a push action, or a pull or a push action or a pull action. And this is where I'm going to go into the guilds. And then I'll come back to this card most likely because it'll make more sense whenever I explain what all the guilds can do. And it'll make more sense about the secondary ability, which is called Feast. So, that's the very last action that you can do. So, to reiterate, you can guild, you can repeat, you can move, you can influence, you can migrate, you can tax, you can harvest, you can explore, you can improve, you can defend, and you can conquer. So those are all the actions that you can select from on your turn. Whew, oh boy. Alright, I hope you got all that. I hope I did a good enough job explaining all of your actions. Now, just to reiterate, you don't do all these actions, you pick 4 of them. You know, everyone will pick their 4, and then out of the 4 that you picked, on your turn, you'll play one, do the action, and then it'll go to the next person, then it comes back to you, and I already said that, but just to reiterate that's what happens. You're not, like, overloaded with 11 cards you have to do, like, in order to do what you want to do. Actually, technically, that'd probably be way easier. So that is the actions. Now, before I even go into, you know, the rest of the round, I need to explain what each guild does. Through the trade action that everyone can do, the push action that only the guildmaster can do, and the pull action that only the journeyman can do. Technically, with more players, there is an associate or apprentice that does nothing. They're just there. So let's go to the guild actions. Okay, so the first guild we're going to talk about is the Farmers Guild. I should mention that each guild integrates with one another, obviously through the push and pull function. So with the farmer, what you're going to see here is you're going to see the 10 goods there. You're going to see the, oh man, what do they call it? The surplus beads. And then you're also going to see the farmer's purse. Up at the top right here, if you can see them, you will see what you do for the pull action and what you do for the push action, and then also spots for influence tokens, and then basically how you get status within this guild. Now, the trade action within the farmer is what's called, you just trade at the guild. What you do is for any farm that you rule, which remember through the harvest action is how you get goods, you can send them to the farmer. And what will happen is for every 2 goods that you send, regardless of what they are, you can get a food or a shilling. Food comes from the haversack and shillings come from the supply. So for every 2 goods you get, that's one way you can get food and money. The the barn can only hold 10 or less goods. But that's what the surplus is. For every good that's sent, it can go above, or the surplus is what bleeds over into the merchant and the alchemist guild. So they kind of like, so let's say there's, 6 goods there and 5 come in. 1 good, because like if there's 6 goods, that'd be 11. 1 good would come over to the merchant. If it can't fit there, it would move over to the alchemist. If it can't fit there, it's gone. So that's kind of what the surplus, the surplus there does, and that's the Farmers Guild. But I should mention that the way you get status here is you get stars, and I'm hoping you can see those right there. Yep. So you get 1 star for having a pawn out. That's for the farmer, the sheep. You get 3 stars if you rule a feudum for that guild. And the pawn and the feudum are primary guild status, which you have to have 1 of before you can get secondary. And the secondary is for every farm that you rule, you get another point. So if you have a pawn out, that's a farmer, and then you have 4, farms, ruled farms, you have 5 total points. But you can't just own farms and then have a membership status. You have to have a pawn or a feudum. In the Farmers Guild, if you are the journeyman, meaning you have the second most points, okay, you have the second most influence points, you'd be on the track with the 3, you can do the pool function, and only you can do the pool function in this guild. What you do here is you have an opponent go over to the monk guild, and take the highest and lowest of the rosemary beads, or the rosary beads. So the highest and lowest that's on his bead thing, they will place them in their left and right hand, and you pick one. Now, if you pick one, you will place it on one of the chickens, okay? And this was a 5, so it's a total of 7. If what the surplus on the beads are equals or exceeds 5, you get 3 points, and you get a royal wit card. Draw 2 and pick 1. And that's the pull action. So you, as the journeyman, can increase the surplus that the farm can hold. As the guild master, which means you have the most influence stars in that guild, you can do a push function, which means you take 5 goods at random from the supply. All right. Oh, not at random, I'm sorry. That's if there's surplus. You take 5 goods of your choice, and you essentially sell them to the merchant. So you'll take 5 goods, and you'll move them over to the merchant guild. Let me zoom out real quick to show this. Okay. So you take 5 goods, and you would get points for it. So if I wanted to do a saltpeter, a sulfur, and then 3 sulfur and a food. Alright, so that's what I'm moving. You would move them over, and you basically replenish his stock. It's kind of like him buying or you selling goods to the merchant. What happens is, if you, for every row or column that you complete, you get 4, 5, or 6 points. So if you complete 1 row or column, you get 4 points. If you complete 2, you get 5. If you complete 3, you get 6. So if I was to do this, I completed 2 columns, or I completed 2 rows, meaning I would get 5 points for that. And any good that, in this case, I wouldn't be able to fill, so it's fewer if impossible, so I would only be able to replenish his stuff like this. These do not go over to the alchemist like with the surplus, so those would be the only 2 I would be able to move. And that is the Farmers Guild. The Merchant Guild, the trade action there is any player can pay shillings to buy up to 3 goods, and the cost is located underneath the actual goods. So the 3 food is worth 1 shilling, while the apple in his hand is worth 2. The saltpeter, the very first one that's empty, if it was covered, is worth 2. Then it goes to 2, then 3, then 4 shillings. So as supplies dwindles, it becomes more expensive to actually buy them. So you can buy any number of goods. You know, you can buy 3 food, or you can mix and match and pay the shilling price for them. So that's the trade action. If you are the journeyman, you will take 3 goods from the farmer, fewer if possible, to refill your stock. So like in this case, I could take the saltpeter, or the sulfur and the saltpeter. All right, and if you complete a row or column, you get 3 points and a royal wit. So you'll draw 2 cards and then pick one. That's the pull action. If you're the guild master, you can do the push action, which means you take 4 goods and you move them over to the merchant's guild. So like, I could take these two food and 2 saltpeter. That is not saltpeter, 2 sulfur, and you replenish his stock. Yay! And it pretty much works the same way. If you complete a row or a complete like triangle, so I completed a row here, depending on how many you did, so I completed 1 row and I completed 1 triangle, so I would get 5 points. If you complete one, you get 4 points. If you complete 2, you get 5 points. If you complete 3, you get 6 points. So that is the push action if you are the guild master of the Merchant's Guild. And his secondary affiliation with locations are towns. The Alchemist Guild. Yay! The Alchemist Guild trade action, and remember the trade actions everyone can do, is you pay 3 shillings, you buy a vessel. One of the 2 available, and that's that. You just pick one. Now remember, if both of them are bought and this is available, then that means ferries are open for business. But, so you just pick which one you want to buy, and then now that's in your supply. Hey, that rhymed. If you are the journeyman, meaning you have the second most points in this guild, you can do the pull action, which means you take 2 goods from the merchant and you move them over. And if you complete a row or a triangle, then you get 3 points and a royal wit, draw 2 cards and pick one. If you are the guild master, which means you have the most points, you can build a vessel or you can build a barrel of crud. And fun fact, crud in these times was known as gunpowder. Now, how you do this is you look at this chart. Let me kind of zoom in. There we go. And basically you decide what you want to build. Like, so if you want to build a vessel, it costs 2 wood and a food. Alright, cool. And then you just take that vessel, and like if you want to build a ship, you would just take the ship and you would place it, you know, in the available area. If you want to build a submarine, you would take a food and 2 iron. If you want to build a flying vessel, you would take 1 of each, a food, an iron, and a wood. That's how you build vessels, and they would go in that spot right there. Let me zoom out a little bit. If you build barrels of crud, you have to build top to bottom, meaning the first barrel of crud that you build takes 2 saltpeter and 1 sulfur. Then to build the second barrel would cost 1 saltpeter and 1 sulfur, and to build the third one just costs 1 wood. So it gets cheaper as you build more. For every vessel or you know, crud that you build, you get 4, 5, or 6 points. So if you build 3 barrels, you get 6 points. If you build 1 barrel, you get 4 points, and so on and so forth. So that is the Alchemist Guild, and his affiliation, his secondary affiliation, are outposts. Okay, so something before I get to the Knights Guild is every time you build a barrel of crud, which I just mentioned in the Alchemist Guild, you essentially fill up a row or a column in the row and column, kind of, sort of, in the Knights Guild. This is not part of the Knights actions, so to speak. So I'm going to remove all of these just for sake of demonstration. If you see here, you see a barrel here, a barrel there, and a barrel there. Those 3 correspond to how many barrels are created. At the beginning of the game, there are 2 rows created, meaning that this total column is already filled up. So if you build 1 barrel of crud, what you do is you replenish everyone's influence spots that are there. So, like, it's kind of difficult to explain, but this whole row is complete. The second row for the second barrel is not fully complete. It still has one empty row, or column, sorry. One empty column. So let's say one barrel is built for the alchemist's push action, for the guildmaster's push action. That would fill up the entire row from the general supply for everyone on that second row. Let's say a second barrel was built. That would completely fill up this, like, everyone's row. It's not one influence per barrel. You basically look at the columns that these barrel markers are under, and then that like tells you, okay, which one is getting filled up. So it's relatively quick to actually get these built, to get influence markers on the board like this. It just takes requirements from the Alchemist Guild to actually push the barrels of Crow. Now, actually, on to the Knights Guild. Now, what the trade action is you spend 3 coins, 3 shillings, to buy your entire row of influence markers, regardless of how many are there. If this is what it looked like for everyone from 2 or 3 barrels of crud being built, then if I as the pink player spent 3 shillings, I could take all 6 of my influence markers, and those would go into my supply. Now, you might have been wondering earlier, whenever I was doing my Conquer Action example, where the monster came from. The monster comes from the Knights Guild. So if you see at the bottom right here, it shows like the big monster, which is this guy, and then the serpent, which is this guy. Whenever you do the trade action, you can forfeit 3 shillings, not shillings, wow. You can forfeit 3 influence to take control of a monster, and you'll take one of those influence and you'll place them on the spot. So if I wanted him, I would place an influence that I just got onto him, or if I wanted the serpent. And I'll explain the monsters a little bit later, but that's how you denote who is in control of it. And then, you know, obviously since I spent 3 shillings, I would get the rest, and those would go in my supply. So that's how you do the trade action for the Knights Guild. And then that's also how you acquire one of the 2 monsters. If you are the journeyman, you, as a push or as a pull action, can build a vessel or a barrel of crud. That's pretty much what they do. You can invent 1 crud barrel or 1 vessel, and then if you do either or, you'll get 3 points and a royal wit, so you'll draw 2 cards and pick one. If you're the guildmaster, you take 1 to 3 different colored influence markers. So I could take these 3, okay? And then they go into the general supply, and you exchange them for king seals. So these would go to the general supply. And then the king seals, which go into the nobles, let me just kind of move that over. You would take king seals from the general supply and fill up, depending on how many barrels you removed. So if I just removed, you know, 2, like red and green, I would take 2 seals and place them on the wax seals available over here. And if you complete a row or a column, you get 4, 5, or 6 points. So since I completed 1 row and 1 column, I would get 5 points because I placed 2 seals there because I, you know, removed 2 influence markers. And that is the Knights Guild, and his secondary affiliation are farms. The noble! The trade action for the noble is you can spend 3 shillings to take a seal. Doesn't really matter which one, you can just take one. You can spend 6 shillings to take 2 seals. That's the trade action. If you are the journeyman, you can take 2 barrels of crud and move them over. Basically, it's the exact same thing as the push action from the Knights Guild, except you take 2 of them, and you replace them with king seals, and if you complete a row or a column, you get 3 points and royal wit cards, and you draw 2 and pick one. If you are the guild master, you take 2 of the seals available here, and you will reveal them. And then what you will look at is you will sum up the total of the seals that, or the beads that are over here, and you'll get points according to the completion. So if the total over here is 5, you get 4 points. If it's 11, you get 5 points. And if it's 17, you get 6 points. That's how that works. Right now, at the monk, it is a total of, well, it's completely mixed up. There we go. It is 9, 12, so it's 14. So really, you would just need to get, what is that, 3? 3 over there to be able to get 6 points. So that is the guild master action, and her secondary are towns. And the last guild is the monk guild. The trade action for the monk guild is you pay 3 shillings, pick an opponent, they will take the highest and lowest rosary bead, place, secretly place 1 in each hand, and you pick a hand, and then you get what you get. That's that, and then you'll get the face up. And remember, face up rosary beads increase your harvest, and they can also increase the favors that you get. And then once you do that, you can get a king seal that way. So that's the trade action. If you're the journeyman, you take 1 seal from the noble and flip it over here, and if the total of all the beads is equal to or higher than 11, you get 3 points. And a royal wit card, draw 2 and pick 1. If you're the guild master, you have an opponent, draw 1, or take the highest and lowest, put them in their hand, 1 in each hand, and then you pick 1. Then you move it over to the chickens, which will, then you total those up. If the sum of all the beads over there is equal to 3, 6, or 9, you get points respectively. So for 3 points, you get 4 points. Or for a total of 3, you get 4 points. A total of 6, you get 5 points. And a total of 9, you get 6 points. That is the monk guild, and his secondary affiliation is our outpost. Whew, and that's pretty much everything. Dear God. Alright, so a few things about the guild still. Whenever you pay shillings for goods, whenever you pay shillings at the merchant, the alchemist, the Knights Guild, actually everywhere except the farmer, you pay the guild members respectively, meaning that so let's say I'm paying 6 coins for 2 rosary beads, alright? And let's say red and blue are the guild, like the red's the guild master and blue is the journeyman. 1 shilling will go to the guild master, another shilling will go to the journeyman, and then the 3rd shilling, I don't know if you noticed, there is a bag that the farmer is holding, and over at the monk there's a chest. If you look back, if you didn't see that first, go back and look at those because those are important. The 3rd shilling will go into either or. If you are paying shillings at the knight, the noble, or the monk, the 3rd shilling will go to the farmer's purse. Same works the other way. If you are paying at the merchant, or the farmer, or I guess you wouldn't pay the farmer, but the merchant or the alchemist, the 3rd coin will go to the church's coffer. Even if you're playing with more people and there's an apprentice, which means they have the 3rd most, which they're at least going to get 1 point, they don't get any money. It always goes to the opposite side's purse or chest. Now, so that was still 6 coins. 1 goes to red, 1 goes to blue, 1 goes to the purse. Then 1 goes to red, 1 goes to blue, 1 goes to the purse. That's how that works. Whenever you are a guild master, you do pay yourself. Like if I was playing purple and I was the guild master and I was the only one there and I spent 3 shillings on a bead or a rose or whatever, 1 coin would go to myself, and then the other one would go to nobody, and then it would go to the opposite, chest, pretty much, the opposite storage. So technically I am paying myself, which means that to buy a bead only costs me 2. But even though it does cost me 3, just 1 comes back to me. Whenever you're doing that, you don't have to pay 2. You still have to have 3 shillings in your supply. Like, I can't just have 2 shillings in my total supply and be like, oh, it would only cost me 2, so I can still do it. That's not the case. You have to have at least the appropriate amount, even though you're paying yourself back. Now, why does the chest and the purse matter? Well, whenever you do the push or pull action at the farmer or the monk, you take those goods, like you take the like the coins that are in the satchel or the chest, and you pay the guild members again. So if I was in the farmers and there was 5 goods or 5 shillings in that purse, and I was the guild master, 1 would come to me, 1 would go to nobody, then 1 would actually, and you kind of split the difference, okay? So that's kind of how those two things work within the guilds. Now, a couple things. That's all the guild actions. They all kind of integrate. They all kind of are the same thing. Like the push actions of one guild are the same as the pull actions of the other one, just slightly modified. It'll start to make sense. They all integrate and help each other out. Now, that is the top of the guild action, and that's why there's a question mark of points, because it does, depending on what you do is the number of points you're going to get. This is also a card that can be played twice with the repeat card. The secondary ability of the guild action is called Feast, which means you turn in a barrel sulfur to perform a feast of someone you're next to. Now, if I have a pawn next to another person's pawn, let's say no one's doing, like, I really need beads to come in, you know, the knight isn't pushing out any barrels to get me beads to the noble. If there is a knight pawn on the board and I have a pawn next to it, I can perform a feast, meaning I turn in a barrel sulfur, which I'll explain in a sec, to perform this action. So basically what it says, and this is, I'm actually reading this right off the cheat sheet, turn in barrel sulfur to perform the push-pull function of any pawn or feudum you are beside. So I'm by a knight, and if the person who this controls is the guild master, I can perform a feast to cause this to basically do the push action myself. When you do this, you get 3 points, as well as you get to do the action of whoever is there. Now, that's the secondary action of the guild. That finally explains everything about actions. That explains everything about the guilds. Now there's just a few more miscellaneous things that happens. I know, before I go into the rest of the actual round. At the beginning of your turn, or actually at the beginning of deciding your 4 cards, you can have a saltpeter or a sulfur in your area, just in your supply. You can spend a saltpeter, that's where this disc comes in, the purse token. You can place a saltpeter on it, only 1 saltpeter, to pick an additional card. So you spend a saltpeter, now you can play 5 cards. Yay, that's actually really good. Everyone can do this. You can actually wait to decide to see if anyone else is doing that, but whenever you play your thing, you have to shout, "Long live the king!" And your choice is finalized. That's a real thing. I didn't make that up. That's if you play a saltpeter onto your token. You get to play an additional card. If you play a sulfur, you can play 2 cards in a row. So you'll only get 4 cards, alright? But you can do 2 actions in a row before anyone else gets to. Meaning your turns will be shorter, but it'll be more efficient. If you're like, okay, goods are running low, I really need to get that food, I have the money before they do. Luckily I'm going first, but still, I'm going to migrate on the board real quick to become guild master, then I'm going to, do a guild action real quick and then buy it and kind of pay myself. So stuff like that. Combos that you can make can happen when you place a sulfur at the beginning of your turn onto that token. So that's one thing you can do at the beginning of your turn. Another thing, and I believe this is the final miscellaneous thing that I can think of before I go into the rest of the actual round, is anytime you receive a sulfur, whether it's from the farmer, the merchant, the harvest, your partial harvest, pilfering resources. Anytime you take a sulfur, you have to decide if you want to place it on your barrel, which is down at the bottom, right by the Monk's Guild. I'm kind of just talking at this point because it might be easier. But everyone has a barrel of their color by underneath the Monk's Guild. You decide if you want to place it in your colored barrel or into your supply. And this is important for a couple reasons. One, that's how you perform a feast. You remember how I mentioned that in the guild, the secondary guild action? That's barrel sulfur. So any sulfur you have in your barrel's color, that's the only way you can perform a feast. You have to spend that. It goes back into the haversack, and then you perform the feast. Oh wow, excuse me. See, I'm having a feast myself. Ugh. So that's one way, or one thing that barrel sulfur does for you. There are limits to that though. You can only ever have 3 sulfur in your barrel at the game. So that is the last miscellaneous thing that I'm going to talk about. Now, I'm going to go the rest of the round, and then I will basically go through these, and then that'll be the rest of this how to play. So, after everyone does their 4 actions, after all that stuff I just explained, you have the nourish pawns, which I did explain is every pawn you have on the board, if you have 1, 2, or 3, you pay 1 food from your supply. So you just pay it, it goes into the haversack. It doesn't go anywhere special, just back into the haversack. If you cannot feed them, then they just come off the board, and you would just, any guild status you would have, that all gets rearranged. That's pretty much as simple as that. You can't do anything if you don't have anyone on the board to play, so you need to find some way to get food. And maintain food, because you can't bring people on if you don't have food. So the other way you can feed them is with sulfur. So, or not really sulfur, but wine barrels, or your barrel wine. Instead of spending a food to feed them, you can feed them, or you can sustain them with, or nourish them with sulfur wine. So what you will do is you will have your pawn, you will take your sulfur wine, which is, the yellow, and you'll place it on top of that pawn, kind of like so. And that will sustain them for 2 rounds, which is a good thing, because now you kind of save up food. The negative is that your pawn is super drunk, meaning that their attack and defense is 0. It sustains them for 2 turns, but it leaves them vulnerable. So there's kind of a risk-reward to that. So during the nourish pawn stuff, everyone pays their food, or if they want to get their people drunk, then they can do that. And then that's that step. The third step is rolling the progress die. Now this is the progress die. The first player rolls it, and they will look at the icon. And I kind of explained this earlier, but now it kind of makes more sense. They'll look at the icon, they'll look at which region that was for, and they'll remove a tile from the top of it that corresponds to that region, and that corresponds to the current era, or epoch. Now, the only time that gets removed is if it's... So right now, we would be in Epoch 1 at the beginning of the game. If Epoch 1 was already removed due to someone upgrading in that region, it would show a 2. Alright? Well, if I roll that, a 2 cannot be removed because we're not in Epoch 2. Basically what you do is you re-roll again until you get something that can be removed. Something will eventually be removed because there's no other way to advance the game. All that tile does, it's not given to anyone, it just gets removed from the game. This is the way that the game can also kind of speed up. If people aren't upgrading, if people aren't doing stuff, this die basically prevents the game from going on too long because it will remove a tile. How epochs move. Then after that, you check and you advance the epoch marker and you score epoch if applicable. How you advance, and I explained this earlier whenever I talked about upgrading, is there are these tiles down at the bottom. As soon as four level 2s are shown up, it's moving to Epoch 2. If 3 level 3s are showing, it's moving to Epoch 3. If 2 level 4s are showing, it's moving to Epoch 4. And as soon as basically one tile is completely gone, then it's the end of the game. Scoring. I'm going to grab the sexy rulebook to explain how scoring works. Well, at the very top of the Epoch track, then that's basically what shows, you know, what epoch it's in. So first you advance the epoch, okay, and then you will score the new epoch. So you score for guild status. Everyone looks at their guild status. If you are guildmaster, you're getting 5 points. If you're, and this is not just total, if you're guildmaster in all 6, you're getting 30 points. Be very difficult, but I guess not impossible. If you're journeyman, you're getting 3 points. If you're playing with 4 or more people and there's an apprentice, they're getting 1 point. So that's for each guild you'd go through. That's the first thing that you'll do. The second thing you'll do, and this is all depicted on the back of your sheet. It goes through scoring, so that's pretty cool. The second thing is you look at landscapes, and I explained landscapes a little bit, is if they have no resources on them, the owner gets 2 points. If they have resources on them, the owner gets 4 points. Then you go to active regions. Active regions mean places that you rule or places that you have a landscape tending serf. And for each, so for one region, you get 1 point. For 2 regions, you get 3 points. 3 regions, you get 5 points. 4 regions, you get 7 points. 5 regions, you get 9 points. And 6 regions, you get 11 points. And it even says right here, score for each region occupied by either a ruler or a landscape tending serf. And that's the regions. So like, not locations. I might have said locations. I meant regions. The 6 different regions, okay, which are the small islands, big islands, the deserts, the forests, the badlands, and the mountains. Those 6 regions. That's how you'll get your points. Then you subtract for disloyalty. Now what this means is this corresponds to the military status track, which is a huge factor, or can be a huge factor. You only subtract for disloyalty in epochs 2, 4, and 5. And you just subtract for disloyalty depending on which spots you are. There's a -3, a -4, and a -5. And you only subtract for disloyalty if you own a feudum but you have not conquered anyone. Meaning, remember how I said down at the military status track you can take one of your disc and you place them on the negative spots, like the -3, 4, or 5? That's why, because these, what do they call it? These are cumulative, which means in Era 2, if you own a feudum but you haven't conquered them, you're getting -3 points. Alright, that's not too bad. In Epoch 4, if you still have not conquered anyone, you're losing -3 and -4 points. So now you've lost a total of 10 points. By Epoch 5, if you have still not conquered anyone and you still own a feudum, like you rule over a feudum, you're basically shitting in the king's face, and now you're getting -3 again, -4, and -5. Like, that's how that works. So throughout the game, if you own a feudum the entire time and you don't conquer anyone, you can get a total of, I think it's -22 points. Right? 9, that would be 12, then that'd be 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Oh, maybe it's no, 19, and then 20, 21. 22. 22 points total is what you can lose if you just go the whole game owning a feudum but never attacking. So, then you will replenish landscapes. This is at the dawn of all epochs. So at the beginning, every landscape, even if it has resources on it, it'll get more. So every orchard, every sulfur mine, every silver mine, and every archery butt will get their things again. Whoever is landscaping them or tending them will choose to take them or leave them there, but they can still be subject to pilfering. Then you replenish the map, and this only happens at epochs 2, 3, and 4. And just like at the beginning of setup, where you put a random resource from the haversack on all north spaces, it'll say it on the spot. Like epoch 2 says south, so you'll take a good and you'll place one on every location that shows an S. Epoch 3 is for east. Epoch 4 is for west. Okay, so it just works the same way as in setup. The last thing, and this only applies for Epoch 3, so essentially halfway through the game, the guilds will replenish, meaning that if the merchant was running low, or the alchemist was running low, or if all the guilds were running low, at Epoch 3 they'll all replenish to their setup, except for like extra goods. So if let's say there was no food in the merchant guild, but they had every other resource, they were full of every other resource, then due to setup, at the beginning of setup, the merchant has all their food. So you would just replenish it. You wouldn't remove any excess goods from anyone. It's not like at the Knights Guild, if everyone's full of influence, you would just remove all their influence and replace it with the 2 that were at the beginning of setup. So basically, stuff that isn't there goes there as if you were setting up. And that's only in Epoch 3. Alright, getting close. The last thing, at the end of the round, you pass the starting player and the butt plug to the next player, and then everyone picks up your 4 cards. And I guess this is important to say because a lot of games that give you your hand and your actions, you don't get back unless you play a certain card or you can't. No, you'll take your 4 actions back into your hand and you start all over. You go until the epoch moves on or whatever. If Epoch 5 was triggered at the end of the round, meaning 1 full stack was removed, then you complete all remaining actions, you score the epoch as normal, then you go to the end game and final scoring. And there's a couple things here, this is important. You look at Epic Voyage, meaning that wherever people are on the track, that's how many points they get. So they can get 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, or 17 points. Basically, you score the higher value if you're in the lead or tied in any section. So the Epic Voyage is broken up into essentially 3 sections. Then you look at large empires, and that is each outpost, farm, and town ruled. You get a point. Yay! Alright, so basically everything except a feudum. For each feudum ruled, you get 3 points. And then for 3 identical locations, meaning, you know, if you rule 3 farms or 3 towns or 3 outposts, you will get 3 points. And a feudum is wild, so it can either match itself or another location. So you can control 3 feudums, and you'll get 3 points. For every 3 shillings you have, that's 1 point. Okay, so if you have 9 shillings, you have 3 points. And then the royal wits, the ones that were the charters, for every seal you have, you put on that, and then if you achieved that goal, you would get the corresponding points that the card told you. And this is all, on the track. Then whoever has the most points is the winner and the most venerated in all the land. If there's a tie, whoever has the most sulfur in his barrel breaks the tie, because sobriety is more honorable. And if there's still a tie, they share the victory. That is how you play Feudum. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a lot. Oh wait, I did forget something. Monsters! The monsters basically act as pawns. They can't improve. They can't, they can't, what can't they do? Let's see. I almost forgot about the monsters just in general because it's just like, oh yeah, there's them. They can't influence locations, they can't perform feasts, and they can't use vessels. That's what it was. But they do pin opponent monsters, not monsters, pawns. So if the big monster is next to an opponent's pawn, that pawn can't be moved or used unless they fight it and defeat the monster, and the monster has a defense of 1. They also do not have to be fed because they eat people. So, yeah, you don't have to feed them. The the beast, like the big beast, he is limited to roads and flying machines. So like he can move. Wait, they can't use vessels. So I guess. Oh, and flying machine routes. Sorry, he doesn't use a flying machine, but he can move by flying machine routes or roads. The sea serpent is limited to submersible and sea routes. That's pretty much it. They count towards your movement allowance. So, like, if you have your 3 pawns out and a monster, you technically have 4 movement points. And like I said, they have an attack of 1 and a defense of 1, so they can help attack in certain locations. And they block opponents' pawns. So those are monsters. Now, that is everything. Oh, dear God. This was probably the most, not difficult how to play, because I've taught it so many times, but the longest how to play that I have done. I hope this helps you a lot. If there's anything that I missed at all, please feel free to leave it in the comments below. And if it's correct, which it most likely will be, I will like and love it, so it bumps up to the top of the comments section so people can see it. Other than that, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching this, and if you like this video, then click the subscribe button below to enjoy any video that I put out. And right next to that subscribe button is a little bell. Click that so you get notified of whenever I actually upload these videos. If you want to support the channel, you can definitely visit my Patreon page. The link is in the description below. Other than that, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and have a wonderful whatever time of day it is for you.